Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. It's been a minute since I've joined you, actually a month and a half, and I've been pretty busy. But if you're curious what I've been up to, I'll get into that more at the end of this video. What I want to bring you today is a review of Rippaverse's Saints and Sinners #1. Now, if you've been with me for a while, you know I read the first 3 offerings from the Rippaverse and I took a break. Um, the storytelling attempts in there were quite good intentioned, I think, but I wasn't really finding a good return on investment for what I was putting into it. These books run about $30 to $35 a piece, and while the art was decent and the storytelling was certainly enthusiastic, I didn't think that that kind of price tag was quite warranted, especially as an ongoing investment into the Rippaverse. I had other indie comic projects I was interested in. I figured I would give the franchise some time in the oven so it could develop some more. And when I heard that Eric July was doing this anthology book with a total of 6 different YouTubers all contributing to the book in one form or another, I was very interested in it. So I figured, why not go back and give it a look, see how it's doing? That's exactly what I've done. All in all, I intend to do 3 videos on Saints and Sinners, and in each one of them, I hope to bring you 2 of the short stories in here in a somewhat detailed review. For the most part, I'm going to try and keep my comments tailored specifically to those stories, but I figured if you're interested in whether you should pick up the book as a whole or not, I should probably start by giving you an overall review. So we're going to do that very briefly before we dive into Chasing Ghosts by As from HeelVsBabyface and Across to Bear by Jay David, also known on the internet as Drunk 3PO. Now, the book as a whole is a pretty good quality book, like the physical item. And if you've been here a while, you know I like to do reviews of the physical books because that's part of what you're paying money for, right? So the physical book is quite good. It's perfect bound, as you can see, and it's got a nice cardstock cover. It's going to hold up pretty well to repeated readings. I've actually been through this book twice, and I will probably be through it again. And as you can see, the binding still looks quite fresh. The cover is not peeling or anything like that. The pages are high gloss. I'm not leaving fingerprints anywhere. All in all, it's a good quality physical item. So you're going to be able to read this 3 or 4 or maybe even a dozen times and get your enjoyment out of it, and it will still look nice sitting there on your shelf. Of course, if you wanted to buy 2 copies, you could very well do that. But, you know, if you're like most of us and you really only want to spring for 1 copy, and you want to save your entertainment budget for other things, well, you can still read it a fair amount and still have a good quality project. Now, all in all, the editorial quality, the oversight on this book, I think has improved a fair amount. The art direction is better. I will be pointing out little art things here and there as we go through. There are a couple of general issues that I think bear mentioning here at the beginning as you think about this. Rippaverse is a very young company, and I don't think anyone in it has ever been specifically editorially focused, and it does show in a couple of places. I have found one page that I'm going to use as kind of an example of things I've seen here and there throughout all of their books, and this book in particular. My goal is not to nitpick every single page, but just to give you an idea of the kind of editorial oversight that I think is still a little bit lacking in the Rippaverse, and I would like to see more of as time goes on. So let's look at this page here. This is a single page from Chasing Ghosts. It is very text heavy, and something has happened in it that I think kind of a disservice to the artists of the Rippaverse. This page was drawn by Diogenes Neves in pencils and Eber Ferreira on the inks. I know I butchered those names, and but what you see here is two layers of the process working against each other. So if you've been with me a while, you know I am very enthusiastic about leading the eye as a critical part of comic book storytelling. I have a whole video talking about the comic, it's called Comic Concepts Leading the Eye. So if you want to know more about the general technical aspects of what I'm talking about here, go and watch that. I'm just going to talk about it on this one page. So when the art was laid out, the artist clearly had a way, a flow, if you will, for the page as the audience is reading it. And I've represented that on this page with this red line. You're supposed to start as we see the lighter flick to life and it lights the cigarette. It kind of leads you around to the lady who is speaking and lighting the cigarette. And the line of her chin just sort of leads you back down around through the ceiling of this larger room, which is a crime scene investigation. And that kind of, this cabinet will lead you down around to the corpse. And from there around to our protagonists, the detective and Ingrid Valdez, then around through dead body and down to the police officer, and again, the detective and Valdez, then around out into the alley and so on and so forth until you get to the end of the page. This is a really straightforward and well executed visual layout that will walk a person naturally through the page. The problem is Invisible Art Studio did the lettering on this, and their lettering completely disrupts the flow of the page. As you can see from the blue line, if you follow the dialogue around the page, it's kind of just going to, lead you across the top panel, which is fine. That is the flow of the art as well. And it's going to lead you down here into the second panel. And then you're going to just zip straight down this panel and into the bottom part of the page. And you're never going to get up to these two right-hand panels. That's not very good layout. I mean, maybe you could take this violet line up and go from the bottom left to the top right, but that's not the way the panels are actually written. It's really terrible layout. It's confusing, and it pushes you in the wrong direction across the page. Editorial should have caught this. They should have said to the letterer, look at these two areas laid out at the top of this second panel. I've circled them in green here. You can see there's plenty of room for text there. It doesn't cover up anything. It doesn't take away from the flow of the page if you put the words there and then let the natural reading eye follow it around through this right-hand purple marked text. And then from there, you could maybe push these bottom three text bubbles down. It really just could have been laid out much better. There's plenty of space for it. The artist did a great job leaving spaces for texts. That is a art form in and of itself. This page is not good. In fact, this layout wise, this may be the worst page in the book because it's fighting with itself so much. The artist did a perfectly fine job laying it out. And then the letterers just took all that and they threw it up in the air. And it's very frustrating to see this. Like these kind of detailed editorial work is what really separates the men from the boys. And you don't see it very often. This is a very text-heavy page. That's part of the problem. But the editors at Rippaverse really should have caught this and sent it back to the letterer to fix it. Because, as I said, there is space there to allow for a good, solid page layout. Just wasn't used properly. I don't tend to pull out all of these that I see as I go through them and record these videos. It's just something to keep in mind. And it frustrates me because I can see that there are a lot of people putting a lot of solid work into Rippaverse books, but the editorial team is not making all those creative visions come together and make a coherent story. I don't know what the editorial process at Rippaverse is, but I really wish they could handle this just a little bit better. So, that said, and although I did use an example from Chasing Ghosts, I want to start by saying that my favorite story in this book was Chasing Ghosts. It's a very interesting and entertaining story. And I don't follow as very closely. Heels versus Babyface is like, as you might guess from the title, it seems to have started as a wrestling channel, and that's never been my cup of tea. He talks a lot about AAA gaming, and I don't know, the pixel art is really my jam. He doesn't cover a lot of games that I dig, but I do watch Real BBC every week. I'm very entertained by that, so I know a little bit about him. I know he likes detective stories, and Chasing Ghosts is essentially a detective story. It has this really great genre feel to it. You can really appreciate the characters. You know, we got the chief of the Floor Spark police department, and his dialogue just seems to leap off the page. We get lines like, well, Briggs, looks like you and your new friend are about to have a play date, and you better make this freak call work. You know, it's that kind of dialogue. It's not natural dialogue, genre dialogue that really grabs you and immediately gives you a sense of the mood and the kind of story you are reading. That's super important, especially in a short story format like this, where you have so few pages to try and cover so much story. I think that Az did a really great job kind of catching some of that genre feel. The investigation is pretty good. There's a couple of things with it. The first one is the story actually opens on the splash page, which is just Ingrid being shot at on a motorbike. And she says, okay, Ingrid, time to earn that paycheck. The whole splash page. And it wastes some real estate that I think could have been used better elsewhere. Nothing wrong with starting in media res with a really strong image. But in this case, dedicating a whole page to it when there are so many different moving pieces in the story, I think was a little bit of a weak decision. I don't know if Az wrote that into his script or if that was a decision at the art stage. I would have liked a little more time elsewhere in the story. In particular, the character Sydney Bloodruth makes a cameo in this story. She tells Ingrid where to go at an important moment, but I don't know how. I don't know exactly what happened there. Let's just say that. I would have liked some of that real estate put into the first page there to have been moved over to that sequence. I understood exactly what Sydney was doing and how she determined where Ingrid should go. That would have made the story more satisfying to me because it is a detective story. And detective stories in particular, they need a little bit stronger line of cause and effect between each step, especially when you are going to a place to confront the killers, which is what Sydney was doing there. Other than that, there was one minor art issue here, and I don't know if this was again, when you have a kind of a weak editorial team there, it's hard to tell what happens sometimes. So when Ingrid is investigating, we see this scene, and she's talking to the police detective here. And elsewhere on this page, it said, these two bodies are parallel to each other. Neither shows any sign of resistance. They were killed at the same time, exactly the same time. I don't know how that could have happened, because I don't see how these two guys could have been standing in the room like this, and what were they doing? How did they wind up in this position? Because look, they're not in a position where they would both be looking at the television. They couldn't have both been seated. There's nowhere for them to sit like this. There's that little end table with a popcorn there in the left-hand side of the panel. Were they both scooping up popcorn? How? I don't understand what happened here, how that lines up with the dialogue later on the page to tell me how these two guys were killed. And I don't know if the artist just had two guys lying on the floor next to each other as his instructions or what. This was confusing, and it kind of sticks a little bit in my craw because everything else here feels like a really great top detective story that's given to us in a few pages with great dialogue, and this one little bit, like the fact that it is the one rough spot in what otherwise is a really well put together, good moving story, sticks in my craw. And I don't know what happened there. I don't know if like Az wrote poor art directions or if his dialogue and his scene description came untethered at some point. But it sticks out to me. And it was kind of a disappointment because I wasn't sure if that was going to be important at some point beyond just the conclusion that they were killed at the exact same time. Odd, very odd. And again, it could have happened at any point in the process, but I feel like a strong editorial team would have immediately caught that piece of art didn't make a whole lot of sense. Hopefully at the thumbnailing process, so that the art studio, the artist and inker could have reworked that a little bit. But all in all, I think the story is really great. It introduces a villain that Ingrid will probably have to work with against for a while, hopefully in Alpha Core number 2. And it brings back the character of Guy Wilkins, who I think is one of the strongest characters that has certainly he's had the strongest emotional impact on me in the Rippaverse so far, from what I've read. Again, just up to Alpha Core number 1, which is where Wilkins originally appeared. And I liked that Az took that element and made it an emotional touchstone for Valdez in this story. All in all, Chasing Ghosts is strong for its character work and its excellent genre portrayal. It introduces an interesting new villain, although we don't really get to learn a whole lot about them, which is a little bit disappointing. Again, in an anthology series like this, you're getting a taste of potential stories, so your mileage may vary on that, but I liked it a lot. So, Across to Bear by Jay David is a story that is pretty much the polar opposite of Chasing Ghosts, and it's an interesting contrast. I think the placement is informative. At least I certainly hope that these stories were carefully arranged to give us insight into one another, because where Chasing Ghosts is Ingrid investigating a crime, Across to Bear is about a character investigating himself. And there's a lot of interesting things going on here. Let me start by saying Jay David has put out 2 young adult comics called the Achromatic Chronicles, which I enjoyed a lot. And if you're looking for more of that lighthearted and wholesome storytelling, this is not that. No, this is a much darker story, not in a bad way. Across the Bear definitely relies on you to pay a lot of attention to what you're seeing. Not a whole lot is said here that tells you what is going on with the characters. Most of what you're going to learn about the protagonist, who is, it seems, a new hero in the Rippaverse, is going to be told to you by the way he acts and the way the universe reacts to him. This storytelling is very simple and straightforward. We're introduced to a character who seems to have some level of amnesia. We get small hints at his past. There's whole pages with maybe a word of dialogue on it. This is a story that rewards paying attention to details. I don't want to show you any of the art here, really, just because it is so rewarding to dig into it in the course of the narrative and try and figure out what each little detail means. Just to give you one example, we see a scene where protagonist wakes up in a hospital bed, gets up, and he's about to break out of the hospital by leaping out the window. He pauses to make the bed. It's a great detail because in one of the flashbacks, we see him in uniform, and it seems like they all in the army, you're expected to police your area and keep your bed or your cot made up neatly. That habit just seems to be so deeply ingrained in him. We see him take the time for that small action before he jumps out the window. I thought that was really cool. I also think that Across the Bear has probably the best executed art in the entirety of the book. There's a decent amount of emotion. There's again all those little visual cues. David has written in a really impressive hint at what kinds of power this character may have. It's the art is moody without being brooding. Like it's hard to put into words exactly how matter of fact the art manages to be about some very brutal situations, without feeling like it's reveling in it. Which there's a lot of hyper violent comics that I've read before that they seem to revel in the violence, where this is very matter of a fact, and it asks you not to revel in what's going on, but rather ask yourself the question, why is this character doing this, and what, how does that speak to who they are as a person? I don't want to over intellectualize it. It's just very straightforward and very satisfying storytelling. And I do want to praise Chris Bolson, who is the interior artist, and I'm not going to try and pronounce that name, the colorist. Those two together really knock it out of the park. Again, I think this is the best art in the book. So these two stories are extremely strong, and they're very different, as has his very wordy detectives talking with each other, exchanging great genre dialogue. Then David has this very taciturn main character who is speaking almost entirely through the actions he takes, and presenting us with a really fascinating and challenging moral question without really saying anything in words about morality. And I think these two stories both set out to do something, two very different things, and they execute on it very well. And the contrast between the two stories makes them a great opening for the book. These stories are strong introductions of new characters, a new villain in the case of Chasing Ghosts, and a new hero in the case of A Cross to Bear. I was very intrigued reading them, and particularly for A Cross to Bear, I was even more intrigued rereading it. And I think that speaks very well of how well that story was constructed. So, two great stories there. And if you are interested in that kind of maybe anti-hero with a guilty conscience story, something similar maybe to Daredevil, Batman, then Across the Bear will really appeal to you. Like genre detective work, Chasing Ghosts may be your cup of tea. I don't know if either story really sells the book on its own, but I think those two together make it worth picking up if you are a fan of genre fiction, because both are good examples of it. And even if you're not interested in the Rippaverse as a whole, would be interested to see more of these particular stories. I'm definitely going to keep an eye on Alpha Core #2 and see if there will be more of Ingrid's storyline developed there, and if the Rippaverse wants to put out a David penned book, I would definitely pick that up as well. For a guy who uses the internet handle Drunk3PO, I think Mr. David is exceptionally good at carefully constructed and very reserved storytelling that I find very satisfying. So those are my thoughts on the first two stories in Saints and Sinners. The next two stories that I will be looking at, hopefully on Wednesday, is The Weight of Restraint and Bone God. Talking more about those in the video to come. So that's all I have to say about Saints and Sinners. If that's what you came here for, thank you for listening. If you would like a channel update and what's been going on, let's get into it. Over the last month and a half, I was working on writing a manuscript for the website Honeyfeed. They were running a novel writing contest, and I spent the last 5.5 weeks roughly putting that manuscript together in an attempt to make the deadline. And then after that, I was kind of catching up on other writing projects. So, I could have also tried to record videos as I was doing that, but I just figured the best use of my time, especially with a September 29th deadline looming, was to just focus on getting that done. So there will be an audience participation voting part of that contest if I make it through the initial round of judging. I'll keep you appraised of that. But in the meantime, I'm just waiting to see if I make it into the top 10 after the contest judges have read everyone's complete manuscripts. Also, I am running a Halloween fiction event on my blog. If you click on Nate Chen Publications down there, it'll take you to my blog and you can find the details there. Hopefully, we'll see a decent number of submissions. There were a total of 3 writers last year. Hoping to get double that this year, get up to 6. So if you're interested in the 2025 Haunted Blog Crawl, click through to Nate Chen Publications down in the description, and you can find all the details there. That is pretty much the state of things here. I want to get back to doing more regular content. I'm going to try and knock out all of Saints and Sinners this week. So video today, another one on Wednesday, and a final one on Friday. After that, I'll probably go back to just doing 2 videos a week, kind of flipping back and forth between reviews and discussing topics. And that's pretty much what it is. I did not plan to take a 1.5, 2-month hiatus, but I think doing that really let me focus on writing for that particular contest, and it gave me a better product and a better chance at winning. So I hope you will forgive me leaving you in the lurch so long. In the meantime, thank you for dropping by. I will be back hopefully on Wednesday with more of this review. Till then, I'll talk to you later.